Now let's talk about locales. Locales is like a whole nother level of segmentation of our content. In many systems, including agility, it's a top level citizen in terms of, hey, have we just assumed that multiple locales is something that anybody might want to
Mhm.
add in? Again, I recommend starting small. Many sites launch with only, even if they, intend to serve many locales, they usually start with one or two at first, even in their pilot, just to prove how that's going to work, to make sure that the sort of the infrastructure that they've set up to manage that amount of content, because as you add a new locale, you may have to translate all of your content to those other locales. It just sort of adds work to your
Yeah.
team. So definitely
And the
start
great thing
small.
about this one too is often you can build locales or regions off your primary. So for this one,
Mhm.
you're starting with something, you're sure you have all those pieces of content, and then to add a whole another one is a lot easier than adding a whole bunch of them up front and then changing your models or changing your content and having to go across all those languages.
Yeah, I would say adding the second one is usually pretty hard. Just getting all your content in there first with one locale is a lot of work for a lot of folks. That is
Yeah.
a big job. Adding the first locale is like not twice as much work, but it's a lot. And adding the third tends to be a
Yeah.
lot
Once
easier
you
once you've kind of gotten
scale
into the
having
rhythm.
just a couple, it's adding more is can
Yeah.
be really, really quick. Yeah.
But I find we've had some customers that have up more than 10 locales that they serve. That's a lot of content. That's just a lot of variations of all the content that you have. So certainly, if you intend to have more than 10 languages that you serve or locales that you're serving content from, it's something that you want to have consider. And this is where we have auto versus human translation that has come in as a big piece here, where you might choose auto translation just for speed, just to get it done, or you can go with like a human, like a TMS service, or maybe an in-house resource for translations to different things. Certainly, if you do have in-house resources, I think that's a blessing. It's awesome to have that person there as part of your team. But it's a choice that I think this choice can evolve like anything else. You might start with auto translation, or you might start with human, and sort of allow both to be part
Yeah.
of the
One
mix.
thing that can really help here that people forget about is that there's a lot of content that actually doesn't need to be translated. So you're looking at a lot of images, avoid putting text in images if you can. That's an example of, forward thinking for locales. Prices, dates, even categories themselves. Technically the categories, you go to the category list, you translate it, and then all the selected categories against all your content should be automatically translated for all of those. So you can really scale that by relating into subcategories and some things like that versus typing in tags as a text field within content, which each one needs to be translated for every single piece of content. So think about your content model if you plan to add locales, or even if you don't plan to add locales, just forward thinking, because you might add one not knowing you needed to add one, in terms of what fields can easily be built in a way that don't need translation, and you kind of separate that. I know sometimes people have something um, like price slash WK, price per week, or price per month, or price. Well, that WK or that MTH in English is going to be something different in another language. And if you combine that with the price as one thing or one field, now you have to go and translate the whole field, versus if you broke it up, you wouldn't have to do that. So there's little things like that you can look at content model wise to make sure you have to translate less fields.
Mhm. Yeah, a model that's optimized for translation is usually has more fields, and sometimes there ends up being like a global list of like common words that are
Yeah,
translated to make it easier
100%.
too.
Yeah.
And then we need to look at bulk versus on-demand translation. And this, I think, when we come back to what you said at the first, John, where you have, hey, get your first language in there first, and then you could do a bulk translation of that if you wanted to deliver two languages as part of sort of the V1 of your solution. So that's a thing that can be pretty easily done. Hey, we're going to export it all out, send it off to a translation service, or some have something, run a script over that to translate everything, and then import it back in. That's a really good thing when you're sort of getting toward a launch of maybe a new locale, or it's sort of a one-time thing. And then I would say on demand for day-to-day part of your marketing rhythm as you're updating content regularly. I think data on demand makes
And a
more sense
huge
for that.
aspect of this one that you want to make sure happens, no matter what system you use, is you want a relationship between your content between the different locales. So for example, if you have a news item or an article and you're on that news item or article, you're able to switch to that a version of that in the other languages. So if you bulk add like a list of articles in one language, and then you switch over to the other language and just import another list of articles in another language, but don't import them in a way that links them up with the other one. As you go to maintain your content and go into that, there's
Yes.
no relationship between the English and the French and the Spanish and the German version. And so it gets very difficult to manually go in and on demand make updates or relate content back and forth. So this is a really big one too. I know in agility, both in our bulk import and also on demand, when you swap between locales, it keeps your context of where you are relating on that piece of content so that you can relate them. And it really does make a big difference long term, especially when you're importing, that you make sure those relationships are there.
Well, and I think from the user experience point of view, John, to the person consuming your content on the front end, say you're on a web page and I want to, I somehow got to the, the German version of the page. I speak English. I want to be able to click on the, view this page in English or whatever
It should
that
keep
sticker
you
is.
on that page in that language.
Right. If my items are related based on the ID or something like that, that it can say, hey, this is the same, the same item in this other locale. That's a really nice thing from a development point of view to create a better user experience.
Yeah, if you think of conversion and you think of, just trying to connect with your customer on the website side and that, or an app or whatever. Yeah. And they're searching for something and for some reason it goes to a different locale. If they now got thrown back to your homepage or somewhere else, they're not switched directly into context, you could lose that whole customer, you could lose that flow. They could be in the middle of a workflow or journey, something like that you don't want to lose.
I think I just wanted to say a quick story. This is actually from someone who was evaluating agility and was doing some UX testing. So we were doing UX testing. I think we picked 5 people who had never used agility before, and we happened to have just translated the front end using agility's translation tools, and which we use agility on agility. So they're looking at the agility content manager, and it automatically loaded up in Spanish for them. And we had them on video being delighted at that because it was an unexpected bonus for them. They were having to speak to they're having to speak in English, which was not their first language, but they were able to see the interface in their first language, which really helped that relationship for sure, which is pretty cool. I love stories like that. My last bullet point on here, although I should have done a bullet point on relating content items, I missed that one, John. But this one you already hit on a little bit is like, are you translating assets and should you be? Some services do this and some folks do a lot of like text on images. My recommendation is the same as what you said, John. You should avoid that. If you need to have text on images, there are tools that can automatically generate those, things like social graphics or things like that. Those can be your open graph images, things like this. You can generate those based on, a base image that has no text on it, that is sort of locale generic. And then we can add on the other text as a composite image that we then deliver to wherever you need it to be if you need to have text on top of the image. But there are services
now all these edge apps and things like that can do it on the CDN level, which gives you all the performance benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of a service like Cloudinary where that's kind of one of their claims to fame is generating social images based on like just a really long query string that you can build, and they have tools to build those. And I'm seeing more and more of those kind of things come up, and it's pretty easy to build those as well. So I would say do that instead of translating your assets. Translate the text and then build the assets dynamically. If you
so the point there is try to avoid text in your images or anything that's locale specific even. Try to avoid that in your images as much as possible, and then use other systems to generate and combine those things. And that will just make it way easier to manage or expand locales or regions, over time.